I still think about that night. 6 years have passed, but the memory hasn't dulled. It sits under my skin, sharp and cold, like an old injury that never quite healed. My Uncle Raymond's farmhouse, tucked away in rural West Virginia, never felt threatening during the day. It was just weathered siding, a sagging porch swing hanging from squealing chains, acres of uneven land cut apart by leaning fence posts. It smelled like wet soil, fuel, and old wood. Ordinary, harmless. But once the sun slipped behind the hills and the last wash of light drained from the fields, the place changed. No street lights, no nearby houses, just darkness and a silence so thick it pressed against your ears. In that quiet, you could hear your own pulse slowing down, each beat heavy. And if you stayed still long enough, you began to feel it, like the silence itself was aware of you, like it was waiting. My Aunt Lillian noticed it first. She wasn't the type to scare easily. She mocked paranormal shows and rolled her eyes at every unexplained noise. But a few months after moving in, she started hearing things outside at night. Footsteps crunching along the gravel drive well past midnight, slow, weighted, intentional. And then, always after, the sound of water breaking. The pattern never changed, steps first, then a splash, as if someone walked from the road, crossed the yard, and entered the pond without hesitation. She'd grab a flashlight and scan the darkness through the window. All she ever saw were ripples spreading across the surface. No footprints, no movement, just the dogs whining at the door, bodies low, tails tucked tight. Raymond said it was animals, raccoons, maybe a buck passing through. Lillian didn't argue. She just stopped sitting on the porch after sunset. I remember the first family dinner when she mentioned it. I laughed it off. Probably a crane, I said. They stand in ponds at night. She looked at me and shook her head. Birds don't sound like boots, she said. Her voice wasn't playful. Their son, Mark, didn't believe any of it. He was 23, studying engineering, obsessed with logic and explanations. He said she was anxious, overwhelmed by country sounds she wasn't used to. When she described the footsteps and the splash, he smirked. "I'll stay here alone this weekend," he said. "I'll record it, then you'll see." That Friday night, he set up a camera facing the front window, placed a couple of beers on the table, and left the television running for noise. The dogs lay nearby, restless. Around midnight, he texted me, "Nothing happening. Told you." The next time I heard from him was the following morning. My phone rang just after 9. His voice was wrong, thin, shaking, like he was holding something back. "Come get me," he said. "Where are you?" "A gas station off Route 41. When I found him, he was sitting on the curb barefoot, wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt. His feet were scraped and bleeding. His eyes were red and unfocused. He climbed into my car without a word and locked the door behind him. I asked him what happened. He stared straight ahead and didn't answer. He kept staring straight ahead for a long time. His jaw tightened. Then, finally, he spoke. "It started around 2:15 in the morning," Mark said. "The dogs woke first. Both of them snapped upright, ears stiff, heads turning toward the front door at the exact same moment. Then came the sound on the driveway, gravel shifting under steady weight, not hurried, not uncertain, each step slow and deliberate, the unmistakable rhythm of boots on crushed stone. Mark muted the television. The footsteps grew louder. The dogs backed away, growling low in their throats, fur rising along their spines. And then came the splash, heavy, solid, like something the size of a man or larger had gone straight into the pond without hesitation. At first I thought someone was trespassing, he said, so I grabbed the flashlight and went to the window. That's when he noticed the water. The pond wasn't reflecting anything. It was glowing, not from above, but from beneath the surface, a dim bluish-white light, cold and unnatural, spreading outward as ripples rolled across the water. Then the pounding started, not knocking, slamming. 3 blows struck the front door, each hit shaking the frame. The dogs went wild, barking, whining, spinning in tight circles. Mark said he couldn't move. His body felt locked in place. Water began to drip from the small window in the door, just a few drops at first, then thin streams sliding down the glass like rain. But it wasn't raining. Another 3 impacts hit the door, harder this time. The entire house trembled. I ran, he whispered. He bolted through the kitchen, out the back door, and across the field barefoot. The dogs followed him into the darkness. He didn't stop running until he reached the road. He never went back. When Lillian and Raymond returned the next day, the house was exactly as Mark had left it. The beers were half finished. The television still murmured softly. The front door was locked. No damage, no footprints, no mud anywhere near the entrance. The only thing wrong were the dogs. They were sitting on the porch, soaked in mud up to their chests, shaking, their tails pressed tight beneath them. A few months later, Raymond drained the pond. They found nothing but silt, broken branches, rusted cans, and an old tire. Not long after, the county filled it in completely. Lillian never heard the footsteps again. Mark moved away, took a job in Cincinnati, built a life far from empty land and silent nights. He almost never talked about the farm. Once, after a few drinks, he told me about a dream he still had. He said the pond came back. Something rose from it. Long, pale fingers broke the surface first, followed by a shape that wasn't quite human. It had a face, but no eyes, just smooth skin where they should have been. It was dripping, he said, even though it wasn't raining. I woke with damp sheets and shaking hands. I told him it was just a nightmare. He nodded like he believed me. 2 years later, new owners bought the farmhouse. They rebuilt the barn and planted crops where the pond used to be. I visited once out of curiosity. The place looked brighter, cleaner, but the air felt the same, heavy, waiting. I didn't stay long. Months later, Lillian mailed me a small envelope. Inside was a flash drive. No note, nothing else. There was only one file on it. Night footage. The recording showed hours of nothing. Mark on the couch, the dogs asleep, the television glowing softly. At 2:11 a.m., both dogs lifted their heads. Faint crunching echoed through the speakers. Then silence. At 2:14, the camera glitched. One frozen frame lingered too long. Through the front window, the area where the pond had been glowed faintly blue.
Then came the pounding. The camera shook violently on its tripod. 3 massive hits. Between the second and third, for a single frame, something appeared at the glass. A hand, not flesh-colored, white like milk poured into water. Fingers stretched too long, pressed flat against the window. The image distorted. Off camera, Mark screamed, "No, no, no!"
The camera tipped sideways as it fell. The last thing it captured was one of the dogs at the door, teeth bared, barking at something just out of frame. The video ended at 2:17 a.m. I sat there for a long time after it finished. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe right. Then I called Lillian. She didn't answer. I left a voicemail, asked her where the flash drive came from, why she sent it. She never called back. A week later, I got a text from Mark. "You watched it, didn't you?" I typed back, "Yeah." "Where did she get it?" He replied a few minutes later. "Mom found it while they were clearing the attic before moving. The camera wasn't there before. She swears it just showed up on the couch one morning." I asked him if he'd watched it. "No." Then another message followed. "And don't." He never brought it up again. Years passed. One afternoon, while driving south, I found myself near the old property. I told myself I was just curious. I pulled over. The pond was long gone. In its place were neat rows of crops, but the ground still dipped slightly, a shallow outline where the water used to be. That spot felt wrong. The plants there were pale, almost silver, nothing like the deep green around them. When the wind moved through the field, that patch shifted out of rhythm. I didn't stay long. Last summer, Mark called me out of nowhere. I hadn't heard his voice in years. He sounded tired, maybe drunk. "You ever think about what it wanted?" he asked. "What wanted?" "The thing in the pond." I didn't answer right away. "Sometimes I hear it again," he said, "when it rains. The splash, always 3 steps first, then the water." I told him to stop drinking and hung up. That night I dreamed I was walking on gravel. 3 slow steps, then a splash. When I woke up, my bedroom window was open. My carpet was wet. I told myself it was nothing, a leak, condensation. The forecast said it hadn't rained. For a week, nothing happened. Then one night, my phone buzzed. A new email, no sender name. Subject line, "Look outside." There was one photo attached. It was my backyard, taken from somewhere near the fence. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m. At first glance, nothing looked wrong. Just grass, the shadow of my house, moonlight on the ground. Then I zoomed in. Near the bird bath stood a shape, tall, too thin. Its outline shimmered faintly, like light bending through water. I deleted the email immediately. 2 nights later, my dog refused to go near the back door. She stood rigid, staring at it, growling deep in her chest. When I opened the door, the porch light flickered, and then I heard it, soft, measured, crunch, crunch, crunch. There's no gravel in my yard. I moved apartments that month. I didn't tell Mark. I didn't tell anyone. But on heavy nights, when the air feels swollen before rain, I swear I can still hear it. 3 slow steps, then the splash, even when there's no water anywhere nearby. Sometimes a faint green glow in the trees. Years before all of this, about 7 years ago, our family gathered for a reunion at my grandparents' hunting cabin, a place so remote your phone was useless, nothing more than a camera. The cabin sat deep in the northern woods, nearly an hour down a dirt road after leaving the highway. That year, almost everyone came. My parents, my brother,
Raymond and Lillian with Mark, my grandparents, even relatives who rarely showed up. The cabin was small, 4 bedrooms, 1 main room, a screened porch, 14 people, and no way to call for help.
That day had felt completely normal. We'd gone fishing at the lake about a mile from the cabin. Later, there was the usual oversized cookout. Too much food, people eating long after they were full. As evening settled in, everyone gathered around the fire pit, swapping stories, burning marshmallows, laughing at the same old jokes. Nothing about it felt strange. As the night dragged on, people started peeling away toward the cabin. My youngest cousin fell asleep first, curled up against Lillian. The older adults followed soon after, yawning, stretching, disappearing inside one by one. By around 11, it was just me and my brother Jake left by the fire. I was 23 then. Jake was 25. We weren't talking much, just sitting there, watching the flames die down, enjoying the quiet after a full day of constant noise. The fire had burned down to glowing coals, throwing off just enough light to see the ground around the pit. Beyond that, everything faded into darkness. The cars, 5 or 6 of them, were parked along the edge of the clearing about 30 feet away, barely visible in the dim orange glow. I remember feeling calm, peaceful, listening to the soft crackle of the last bits of wood and the steady chorus of frogs and crickets deeper in the woods. The moon that night was only a thin slice. Beyond the firelight, the world was pitch black. Not regular darkness, real darkness, the kind you only get far from towns and roads, the kind where you can't even see your hand in front of your face. That's when I noticed it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. Shadows do that when you stare too long into the dark. But then Jake stiffened beside me, and I knew he saw it too. Between the parked cars, about 3 feet off the ground, hovered a strip of green light. It wasn't a beam like a flashlight. It wasn't round or scattered. It was a shape, a horizontal bar, maybe a foot long, solid and defined. The color was wrong. Not neon bright, not faint, just steady, deep green, almost emerald, but unnatural in a way I can't explain. It didn't look like any light source I'd ever seen. "Do you see that?" Jake whispered. His voice sounded out of place in the quiet. I nodded, then realized he probably couldn't see it. "Yeah," I whispered back. "What is that?" The green bar moved. It slid between the first 2 cars at a perfectly even pace. It didn't bob or sway like something being carried. It didn't speed up or slow down. It moved too smoothly, too evenly. There was no sound at all, no footsteps, no rustling, nothing, just that silent green shape gliding forward. As it passed, the light reflected off the bumpers and sides of the vehicles, coating them in a faint green sheen. That reflection made it real, physical. This wasn't our imagination. "Should we wake everyone up?" I asked quietly, unable to look away. "Let's see what it is first," Jake said, standing slowly. I stood up too, but neither of us stepped forward. We stayed where we were, watching. The green bar continued its path, moving past each car one by one. It wasn't rushing. It moved like it had all the time in the world. I was halfway through telling some stupid joke when one of my friends suddenly stopped laughing.
He went completely still and slowly raised his hand, pointing toward the window. "What is that?" he whispered. I turned my head, and the second I saw it, my stomach dropped. There was a shape moving along the tree line at the edge of our property. It was unmistakably human in outline, but nothing else about it felt human at all. Even from that distance, I could tell it was huge, at least 6 feet tall, probably closer to 7 or 8. The shoulders were far too wide, the upper body thick and heavy, tapering down in a way that made its proportions feel wrong. But the worst part was how it moved. It didn't stumble, it didn't crunch leaves or snap sticks the way something that big should have. It just glided, smooth and silent, like it wasn't bound by the ground beneath it. All three of us saw it. Without saying a word, we dropped below the window at the same time, like we'd practiced it. None of us dared speak. I remember being terrified that somehow it knew we'd noticed it, that it would turn its head and look straight at us. After a few minutes that felt way longer than they were, we slowly worked up the courage to peek again. It was gone. We didn't look out that window again for the rest of the night. The next day, we tried to explain it away. Maybe it was just some guy trespassing, hunting illegally on our land. But even as we said it out loud, we all knew it didn't make sense. The size was wrong, the movement was wrong, everything about it was wrong. For years after that, strange things kept happening. Some nights, I'd hear heavy footsteps moving around the house. Other times, branches would snap deep in the woods, far louder than they should have been. But I never saw anything clearly again. Not until a few years ago. I'd started jogging to stay in shape and mapped out a route that went deep into the forest behind our property. On this particular day, it was early autumn, cool air, perfect for a long run. I'd gone about a mile past where anyone else ever went. There were no real trails back there, just animal paths and natural openings. I was feeling good, pushing myself, when I had to force my way through a thick patch of thorn bushes. They clawed at my clothes and skin, but I knew there was a small clearing on the other side that would make running easier. The moment I broke through, everything stopped. And I don't mean quiet, I mean absolute silence. No birds, no insects, no wind in the leaves. It was like the entire forest had been switched off. I stopped running immediately. Every instinct in my body was screaming that something was wrong. Then I heard it. To my left, the sound of heavy branches snapping, thick wood breaking apart, not the kind of noise a rabbit or deer makes. I turned toward the sound. About 30 yards away, moving through the trees at the edge of the clearing, was something. It was massive. Standing upright on 2 legs, but moving far faster than anything that size should be able to. Its body was covered in thick, matted fur, mostly black, streaked with dark brown and patches of dull tan. The fur wasn't clean or uniform like a healthy animal's. It looked torn, ragged, worn down. And that's when I realized it hadn't noticed me yet. That somehow made it worse. When the green light reached the last vehicle, my grandfather's old pickup, it stopped, completely still, not drifting, not pulsing, just frozen in place for a few seconds. Then it moved again. This time, it turned toward the back of the cabin, heading for the trees. "Come on," Jake whispered. He started forward slowly, careful with each step. I followed, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it was climbing into my throat. We circled around the parked cars, keeping our eyes locked on the green bar as it continued its calm, steady motion. With every step away from the fire pit, its glow vanished completely.
Now the only light came from that green bar ahead of us. The back of the cabin was swallowed in darkness. The windows were black. Everyone inside was asleep. I could hear Jake breathing beside me as we paused at the corner of the building, watching the light glide toward the tree line. "What the hell is it?" I whispered. My voice sounded thin, small. Jake didn't answer. He just placed a hand on my arm, a silent warning to stay quiet. The light never changed. Same speed, same height, no hesitation. It reached the edge of the woods. We followed again, carefully stepping over uneven ground. My foot caught on a root and I nearly fell. I managed to catch myself, but the sound echoed louder than I expected. The light didn't react. It didn't speed up. It didn't turn. It didn't acknowledge us at all. That's when I realized something was wrong with the distance. We were walking toward it, but we weren't getting closer. At the same time, it wasn't pulling away from us either. No matter how carefully we moved, that gap stayed the same. Close enough to see it clearly, never close enough to understand it. The green bar slipped between the first trees and kept going, weaving effortlessly between the trunks. We stopped at the edge of the forest. Even during the day, those woods were thick and hard to navigate. At night, without flashlights, following it would have been reckless. So we stood there, at the line between the clearing and the trees. The light moved deeper in, maybe 50 feet now, still visible between branches, still steady, still wrong. Then it happened. The light didn't dim. It didn't flicker. It didn't fade away. It simply vanished. 1 second it was there. The next, it wasn't.
One moment it was there, sliding smoothly between two massive oak trees. The next moment, nothing. The darkness snapped shut so suddenly it made me suck in a breath, like someone had flipped a switch. We stood there, frozen, staring into the space where the green light had been. I don't know how long we stayed like that. It could have been seconds. It could have been 10 minutes. I was straining my eyes so hard, desperate to catch even a flicker, that black spots began to bloom in my vision. "Should we go check?" I finally whispered. Jake didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was low and steady. "No," he said. "Let's go back." We turned and moved carefully around the cabin. By the time we reached the fire pit, it had burned down to a faint red glow, barely lighting the ground. Neither of us spoke. The summer air felt cold against my skin, and I could tell from the way Jake held himself that he was shaking too. When we reached the fire, Jake scuffed dirt over the remaining embers. "We should go inside," he said. His voice sounded more normal now, but there was still tension underneath it. "What about what we saw?" I asked. He shrugged, but it felt forced. "I don't know what it was, but I don't think we should tell anyone. You know how Grandpa gets with his stories, and the kids would freak out." I nodded, even though part of me wanted to wake everyone up. More witnesses, proof that we weren't imagining things. But another part of me understood. What would we even say? That we'd watched a floating green bar of light drift into the woods and vanish. It sounded ridiculous. So we went inside. We stepped carefully around sleeping cousins stretched out on air mattresses in the main room. Jake took the couch. I lay on the floor beside it. I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that light moving between the cars, perfectly even, perfectly silent. The next morning, while everyone ate breakfast, Jake and I went outside to check the area in daylight. There was nothing. No footprints, no broken branches,
No disturbed ground. Nothing to suggest anything had passed through there at all. We never mentioned it to the rest of the family. Over the years, Jake and I have brought it up occasionally when we're alone. We've searched online for similar stories, read about strange lights in forests, dug through local folklore. Nothing matches what we saw. I've gone through every explanation I can think of. Some natural phenomenon, a prank, a military test. None of them fit. I've been back to the cabin several times since then. Every visit, I find myself staring into the darkness at night, watching the clearing beyond the firelight. Part of me wants to see it again, to prove it was real. Another part of me is terrified of what that would mean. It's been 7 years, and I still get chills thinking about that night. The worst part wasn't just the light itself. It was the way it moved. Purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was going. And sometimes, in the quiet moments,
Before I fall asleep some nights, I can't stop thinking about it. What if that light wasn't moving away from us at all? What if it was leading us somewhere? And what would have happened if Jake and I had followed it into those woods? I need to get this off my chest because it's been eating at me for years. I don't expect anyone to believe me. I just need to say it. Maybe someone out there has seen something similar and can help me make sense of it. I've lived my whole life in a tiny town in rural Ohio, right near the Kentucky border. Our house sits at the edge of everything, civilization on one side, and behind us, nothing but 2 massive stretches of private forest. Most days it's quiet, peaceful, even beautiful. But there's something wrong with those woods. Growing up, I spent countless hours back there. I knew every creek bed, every fallen tree, every deer trail for miles. The animals were always normal, deer, raccoons calling at night, and once every few years a black bear passing through. Nothing unusual. Except for the things I couldn't explain. The first time I realized something was off, I was 9 years old. My dad and I had been clearing brush near the edge of our property. We moved a massive log, 50, maybe 60 pounds, and stacked it near the tree line. The next morning, I was waiting for the bus at the end of our long driveway. It was early, still dark, completely quiet, except for birds just starting to wake up.
almost like parts of it were gone, patchy, uneven. I couldn't make out its face clearly, thank God for that. But as it burst through a narrow gap between two thick trees, I caught a side view of its head. It looked too small for the rest of its body, almost sunken directly into those massive shoulders with barely any visible neck at all. Its arms were unusually long, swinging as it ran, sometimes reaching out to shove off nearby trees to change direction without slowing down. The way it moved was horrifying, not wild or panicked, but focused, purposeful, like it knew exactly where it was headed and what it was doing. And it was fast, unnaturally fast. It crossed the clearing in just a few seconds and vanished into the thick forest on the other side. I stood there frozen, maybe 10 seconds at most, before pure survival instinct finally took over. I spun around and ran toward home harder than I ever had in my life. I didn't care about the thorns ripping into my arms and legs as I tore back through the bushes. The entire time, I was convinced something was right behind me, close enough to reach out and grab me with massive hands. I didn't stop until I burst out of the tree line and saw my house. Since then, things haven't gotten better. They've gotten worse. 2 winters ago, after a heavy snowfall, I found footprints leading from the woods straight up toward our house and around the back. They were enormous, easily 15 inches long, with a stride close to 4 feet. Whatever made them was covering ground at nearly twice the length of a normal human step. At night, I've heard tree knocks, sharp, deliberate strikes against wood. Sometimes they come in patterns, 3 quick knocks, then 2 slower ones, then 3 quick again, like some kind of signal. Other nights, I've heard something that almost sounds like a voice. Low, guttural, too deep to be human, but unmistakably trying to imitate speech. Twice now, something has slammed into the side of our house hard enough to rattle the windows and knock pictures off the walls. The first time, I convinced myself it was just a deer. The second time, the impact was so powerful that I know it wasn't an accident. Both times, when I checked outside, there was nothing. No blood, no fur, no sign of what could have hit the house with that much force. The stray cats that used to hang around our property have almost completely disappeared. We used to have 6 or 7 that we'd feed now and then. Now, there's only 1 left, and it refuses to go more than a few feet from the porch, even when it's hungry. I don't know if what I've been dealing with is a single creature or more than 1. I don't know if it's some unknown animal or something else entirely. What I do know is this: I'm not imagining it, and it isn't leaving. If anything, it seems bolder now, coming closer to the house, staying nearby longer. Just last week, while I was taking the trash out at dusk, I heard breathing. Not light breathing, deep, rumbling breaths from something with massive lungs. The sound was coming from just beyond the tree line, no more than 20 yards away. I dropped the trash bag and ran back inside, locking the door behind me. Part of me has thought about setting up trail cameras out there, but another part of me is terrified to do it. What if I capture something on video that doesn't make sense? Something I can't explain away. Something I can't unsee. Or worse, what if whatever's out there realizes it's being watched and decides it doesn't like that? My parents think I'm letting my imagination get the better of me. Nobody in town openly talks about strange things happening in those woods either. But I've noticed something.
A few of the older locals get uncomfortable when I mention the noises at night. One guy at the general store just went quiet, shook his head, and said, "Some parts of those woods weren't meant for people, never were." Then he changed the subject like he'd said too much. Whatever walks those border woods is still there. I hear it most nights now, moving closer, circling, testing how far it can come. I don't jog deep into the forest anymore. I don't even like being outside after dark. But leaving isn't an option. This land has been in my family for generations. It's my home. So I stay, listening to something massive shifting just beyond the tree line, wondering when it'll stop watching from a distance and finally step into view, and what I'll do when that happens. I've put off writing this for months, but I need to get it out, especially after what happened during one of my night shifts at the school where I work as a security guard. This was back in April of 2020, right when COVID was hitting hard. The school is an old New England boarding campus dating back to the late 1800s. It's one of those historic places, beautiful brick buildings, slate roofs, old trees lining the walkways, mixed in with newer facilities. When the pandemic hit, the campus was evacuated almost overnight. One day, the campus was full of teenagers, noise, and movement. The next, it was completely empty. I'd been working there for about 3 years at that point, but I'd never seen it like that. Even during school breaks, there were usually international students or faculty living on campus. But during COVID, it was just us, 4 security guards, rotating shifts. The campus itself is massive. 8 student dormitories, all old brick structures. There's an adult dorm where some teachers live, though the upper floors have been abandoned for years. There are former condos turned into admin offices, an old Victorian house used for admissions, a small New England church, a boathouse by the river, an aging library, and the original school building from the founding days. Then there are the newer buildings, the rec center, sports complex, science building, and arts center, built within the last 15 years. My shift that night started at 11 p.m. It was unusually cold for April, and a thick fog had settled over the campus, clinging low to the ground and swallowing the buildings in patches. The kind of fog that muffles sound and makes everything feel isolated. And that is when things started to feel wrong.
The memory that sticks with me most is how unreal everything looked that night. The empty buildings rising out of the fog felt like something straight out of a horror movie. Dark, silent, and watching. Because of the pandemic, we were under new orders to do a full campus sweep every 2 hours. That meant physically walking through every single building to make sure nothing was wrong. With the school deserted, administration was worried about break-ins or vandalism. I started my first round right at midnight. The newer buildings were uneventful. I checked the rec center first. The indoor pool was drained and covered, but the air still reeked of chlorine, sharp and chemical, like the place was holding on to a memory of activity. The sports complex was the same, lights off, echoing emptiness, nothing out of place. What bothered me most was the silence. Normally there were background noises everywhere, fans, vents, distant voices, music bleeding through walls. That night, there was nothing, just my own footsteps and the hum of my radio. Everything stayed calm until I reached the science building a little after 1 a.m. The science building connects to the old school building through an enclosed walkway. I finished checking all 3 floors of the science center and was heading toward that corridor when I heard it. Footsteps. not slow creaks or random pops, actual running footsteps, loud and fast, coming from the floor above me. I froze instantly. I was already on the top floor. Above me was only a mechanical space for the HVAC system, and the only access to that room was from an exterior ladder. And these sounds weren't mechanical. They were unmistakable, hard-soled shoes hitting the floor in a sprint. "Hello?" I called out, forcing my voice to sound steady. "Security, is anyone there?" My words echoed down the empty hallway. The footsteps stopped immediately. For a moment, I told myself it had to be one of the other guards, even though they weren't assigned to this area. I raised my radio and said, "Hey, is anyone in the science building right now?" Tony came back almost instantly. "Negative. I'm over in the library. Jake's checking the admin building. You good?" "Yeah," I said after a second. "Thought I heard something. Probably nothing." But I knew that was a lie. Buildings settling don't sound like someone running full speed. I crossed the enclosed walkway into the old school building, and that familiar sense of unease hit me right away. Even when the campus was full, that building had always felt off. 4 stories tall, narrow hallways, creaky wooden floors, and old classrooms with transom windows above the doors that looked like unblinking eyes in the dark. The first floor was quiet. I went room by room, sweeping my flashlight across desks, chalkboards, and shadowed corners. Nothing moved. Nothing felt disturbed. When I reached the stairwell and started climbing toward the second floor, I heard the footsteps again. This time, they were directly above me. Fast, purposeful, moving across the third-floor hallway from one end to the other, then stopping dead. I paused halfway up the stairs, my grip tightening on the railing as my heart started to hammer. I tried to reason with myself. There had to be an explanation. Maybe an animal had gotten inside somehow, a raccoon, a stray dog. But animals don't run like that, and they don't stop all at once. I forced myself to keep going and stepped onto the second floor, the sound of the old wood creaking loudly under my boots as the silence closed back in around me.
On the far wall that looks out over the quad. As I stepped closer, I realized the glass was fogged from the inside, like someone had been breathing against it. Right in the center was the faint outline of 2 handprints, smeared slightly downward, as if whoever made them had leaned their weight forward. My stomach dropped. I stood there staring for a few seconds, trying to convince myself it was old condensation, something left over from the day. But that didn't make sense. The building had been empty for weeks, and the room temperature was steady. Slowly, almost against my will, I raised my own hand and placed it near one of the prints. It was bigger than mine, wider fingers, longer reach. I backed away immediately. That was it. I was done pretending this was nothing. I radioed again, my voice tighter this time. "Tony, I need you to come to the art center, now." "What's wrong?" he asked. "I'm not sure," I said honestly, "but something's off." He told me he'd be there in a few minutes. I didn't wait in the room. I stayed in the brightly lit lobby, pacing, listening to every sound echo through the building. The voices didn't come back. No more footsteps, just silence so thick it felt like pressure in my ears. When Tony finally arrived, we did a sweep together. He saw the handprints too, though he tried to laugh them off. Probably old, he said, but he didn't sound convinced. We finished the rest of the round together after that, sticking close, neither of us mentioning how fast we were walking. The rest of the night passed without incident, but I never relaxed. Every shadow felt
deeper. Every noise felt intentional. I still work there, and sometimes during late shifts when the fog rolls in just right, I hear running footsteps echoing through empty hallways again. Always just out of sight, always moving to another floor before I can get there. Whatever was in that building that night didn't want to be seen. It just wanted me to know it was there.
Of the room, and with the lights on, it turned into a mirror. That's when I noticed something that hadn't been there a second earlier. In the reflection, standing just behind me, was a face. It was bluish, like skin starved of oxygen. The face looked swollen and strained, mouth slightly open as if gasping for air that wouldn't come. It was shorter than me, roughly the height of a young teenager. Its eyes were wide, unfocused, full of panic. I spun around instantly. There was nothing there. I snapped my gaze back to the window. The reflection was gone. The fear that hit me then was unlike anything I'd ever felt. It wasn't a jump scare kind of fear. It was deep, primal, the kind that shuts your body down. My limbs went numb, my chest tightened, and for a moment I honestly couldn't move. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds, but it felt endless. Then instinct took over. I ran. I bolted out of the room, down the stairs, and straight out of the building. I didn't shut off the lights. I didn't look back. I burst into the parking lot and bent over, hands on my knees, sucking in air like I'd just escaped something that almost had me. My radio crackled to life. My supervisor was asking why my location hadn't updated. "I'm outside the arts center," I said, my voice shaky. I lied and told him I was just taking a short breather. He asked if everything was okay. I said yes, but I didn't believe it myself. I never finished that round. I went back to the security office and told them I wasn't feeling well. Nobody questioned it. I think they could hear it in my voice. The next day, I told my boss what happened. He's an older British guy who's been on campus longer than almost anyone. I expected him to smile politely and tell me stress was getting to me. He didn't. Instead, he went quiet and told me two things. First, he described an incident years earlier in one of the older buildings. He said he'd felt trapped, cornered by something he couldn't see but could absolutely sense. He told me it was the most afraid he'd ever been in his life. Then he told me about the school's past. In the early 1900s, two boys used to play on a crude wooden raft in the river near where the boathouse now stands. One afternoon, one of them slipped and went under. The other boy ran for help, but by the time anyone arrived, it was too late. Over the decades, people had reported seeing a bluish figure on campus, small, child-sized, always appearing distressed, like it was struggling to breathe. I didn't argue. I didn't ask questions. Everything he said fit too well. I've worked plenty of night shifts since then, but nothing like that has ever happened again. Still, I avoid the art center and the old school building whenever I can, especially after dark. Sometimes I wonder if the campus being completely empty during the pandemic made it easier for things like that to surface, like the absence of people thinned whatever barrier usually keeps the past quiet. I don't claim to understand ghosts or the paranormal, but I know what I heard, and I know what I saw. That blue face in the glass is burned into my memory, and sometimes I catch myself wondering if that boy is still there, trapped in the same moment, still trying to get someone to notice him after all this time.
3 weeks. That's what my parents said I needed to build character and get some fresh air. I wasn't exactly outdoorsy, but I didn't mind it too much. Camp was pretty standard. Swimming in the lake, archery, campfires, the usual stuff. We slept in small wooden cabins with
4 bunks each. I shared mine with 3 other boys my age. Tanner, who was obsessed with dinosaurs and could tell you the difference between an Allosaurus and a T-Rex without missing a beat. Derek, always sneaking candy and carrying a ridiculous collection of Pokemon cards, even though the counselors said no. And Mike, the athletic one, constantly talking about his baseball league back home. We got along fine, considering we were just thrown together. The cabin itself was nothing special. Wooden walls, small windows, bunk beds with thin mattresses, and that perpetual smell of pine mixed with boys who didn't shower enough. My bunk was on the bottom, right by the door, which I hated because people always bumped into my feet. One of the camp's weird traditions was a mandatory quiet hour after lunch. They called it rest period, but everyone knew it was really nap time, though nobody ever actually slept. Instead, we whispered jokes, talked about gross stuff, and complained about which counselors were the meanest. That day was probably our 5th or 6th at camp. It was hot, sticky, and humid, the kind of heat that made your shirt cling to your back. Lunch had been sad-looking hot dogs and baked beans. None of us wanted to eat much. We flopped onto our bunks, whispering as usual. Derek was telling us about sneaking into the kitchen and catching 2 counselors kissing. We were cracking up, making kissing noises and laughing too loud. Mike was doing ridiculous impressions of the counselors, and Tanner was nearly falling off his bunk laughing. Then we heard it. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate, on the wooden stairs outside our cabin. Instantly, everything went silent. "It's Jenkins," someone whispered, the head counselor, middle-aged, permanently sunburned, with a voice that could cut through solid wood. If you got caught talking during quiet hour more than twice, you had to sit out the evening activity. We all dove under our covers. I pulled mine up to my chin, closed my eyes, and tried to slow my breathing. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. The footsteps stopped. No knock, no voice, just silence. We lay frozen, pretending to sleep, counting each breath. Seconds stretched longer than they should. Something felt wrong. Jenkins always knocked, and he never walked that slowly.
That night, the plan had been simple. A small bonfire outside, just to enjoy the quiet. The cabin door creaked, and I froze. I couldn't see who it was at first, but I could feel the faint shift in the dim light as someone stood there. Silence stretched for a moment, thick and heavy, before a voice broke it. It wasn't Eddie or Jake. It was my uncle. He rarely came in during the night, usually letting us handle things ourselves. His tone was calm but commanding, with a strange cadence I couldn't place, almost southern, almost something else. "You boys need to sleep, not whisper. Rest now." Just that. No yelling, no scolding, no threats. Then the door shut, and I could hear his footsteps fading down the hall. The encounter hadn't lasted more than 20 seconds, yet somehow it left a weight in the air. I waited a few seconds longer to be sure he'd actually left. Then I opened my eyes, ready to glance at Eddie and the others to share a quiet laugh about the scare. But what I saw made my blood run cold. Eddie, Jake, and the dogs were all still, completely motionless. Eddie's chest rose and fell in a slow, deep rhythm. Jake lay on his side, perfectly calm. Even the dogs, normally restless, weren't moving a muscle. At first, I thought they were pretending. "Guys, he's gone," I whispered. Nothing. I tried again, a bit louder. "Eddie, Jake." Still nothing. I got up slowly, my heart hammering. This wasn't a joke. Their bodies were completely limp, completely unresponsive. One second they'd been awake, laughing and joking. The next, they were in a deep, unshakable sleep. I sat back down, staring at them, trying to process what had just happened. The cabin felt different now. Same wooden walls, same soft light from the windows, but heavier somehow. The air felt thick, almost pressing down. Silence surrounded me, broken only by the faint, even breaths of Eddie and Jake. I tried to make sense of it. Had my uncle done something to them? Was it some strange reaction to dinner? Was I losing it? Nothing fit. Eventually, I lay back down, still alert, still confused, the cabin feeling wrong. I was completely awake, my heart still racing from everything that had just happened. Sleep felt impossible, but I didn't know what else to do. I lay there staring up at the bunk above me, counting the wooden slats holding the mattress in place. 1, 2, 3. I don't remember getting very far. The next thing I knew, the sharp clang of the camp bell jolted me awake, announcing the end of quiet hour. I shot upright, disoriented, my heart pounding all over again. Around me, Eddie and Jake were waking up too, stretching, yawning, acting like nothing strange had happened. One of them immediately started talking about the swimming test scheduled for later that afternoon, completely casual, like it was just another normal camp day. "Guys," I said, my voice sounding shaky even to my own ears, "do you remember what happened before we fell asleep?" They all looked at me like I was speaking another language. "What are you talking about?" Jake asked, tying his shoes. "Before quiet hour," I said. "We were talking, laughing, then my uncle came into the cabin. After that, you all just passed out." Eddie laughed. "I don't remember your uncle coming in at all. I was out the second I laid down." "Same," Jake added. "Lunch knocked me out." I felt my stomach twist. "No, that's not what happened. You were awake. You were all awake. He told us to rest, and within seconds you were asleep." They exchanged looks. "Dude," Jake said with a shrug, "you must have dreamed it." "I didn't," I insisted. "You were talking. You were laughing. Then suddenly—" "Nope," Eddie interrupted. "I laid down and fell asleep. That's it." No matter how much I argued, their stories never changed. According to them, they walked in, laid down, and immediately fell asleep. None of them remembered talking, none of them remembered laughing, none of them remembered my uncle stepping into the cabin. Eventually, I stopped trying. The day went on like normal. The swimming test, dinner, that night's bonfire. Everyone laughed, joked, and acted like nothing strange had ever happened. But I couldn't stop thinking about it. That feeling never left me. For the rest of camp, I watched my uncle whenever he was around. He never looked at me strangely, never said anything. He was just the camp director, giving announcements, talking to parents, organizing activities, completely normal. When I got home, I tried telling my parents. They brushed it off, saying it was probably a dream or my imagination running wild. Over the years, I've told a few friends, and every time I get the same reaction. I must have misremembered, I must have been half asleep. Kids fall asleep fast. But I know what happened. I was awake, they were awake, and then, within seconds, they weren't. Sometimes I wonder if there was something hidden in my uncle's words, some kind of suggestion, or maybe something stranger, like time itself slipped in that cabin. Maybe what felt like seconds to me was much longer for everyone else, long enough for them to fall asleep naturally. I don't know. All I know is that whatever happened in that cabin during quiet hour, it only happened to me. And I've never been able to explain why. Refused to sleep without someone nearby. That night, she crawled into my bunk after Rhonda tucked us in. I didn't mind.
We whispered for a while about silly things, trying not to wake Rhonda in the other room. Around 9:30, everything seemed normal. The house was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ceiling fan and the occasional creak of the wooden floors settling. That's when I noticed it, a faint movement in the living room, shadows stretching strangely across the walls. At first, I thought it was just the light from the street lamps outside, but the shadows didn't match anything I could see through the window. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate whisper. "Sleep now." I froze. My little sister buried her face into my shoulder, sensing something was wrong. The voice was gentle, but had an odd weight to it, almost like it carried authority. I strained my ears, but the house was otherwise silent. Rhonda was upstairs in her bedroom, asleep, and the boards weren't moving. I peeked toward the doorway and saw a faint glow, like moonlight, but thicker, almost solid. It pulsed softly near the floor of the living room. My heart was hammering in my chest. I didn't move, barely even breathed. The glow started to shift slowly across the floor, inching closer to us. Instinct screamed at me to run, but something rooted me to the bed. The voice whispered again, almost directly into my ear this time. "Sleep now." My sister whimpered. I reached over and held her hand tightly. Seconds felt like hours. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the glow vanished. The shadows fell back to their normal positions, and the house felt normal again. My pulse was still racing, but everything else was quiet. I didn't say anything to my sister. I didn't want to scare her. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, watching the ceiling fan spin slowly, trying to convince myself it had been a dream, but I knew it wasn't. That night marked the first of many experiences I couldn't explain. From then on, strange occurrences seemed drawn to me. Lights flickering, objects moving, whispers in the dark. My mother's stories about the spiritual world and my connection to it suddenly made sense. And even now, after all these years, I can still feel that same presence just beyond the edge of perception, reminding me that some things are watching, even when no one else can see them.
I slept peacefully after that, all the way until morning. I woke up to the smell of pancakes and the sound of birds chattering loudly in the living room. For a few seconds, I lay there rubbing my eyes, completely forgetting about what had happened the night before. It wasn't until I walked into the kitchen and saw Mrs. Keller standing at the stove that the memory came rushing back. She turned and smiled when she saw me. "Morning, sleepyhead," she said warmly. "Did you sleep okay?" I climbed onto one of the tall kitchen chairs, my feet swinging above the floor. "I was scared at first," I said casually, the way only a kid can talk about something strange. "But then someone told me to go to sleep, and I did." Her hand froze mid-motion, spatula hovering over the pan. "What do you mean, someone? Did you have a dream?" I shook my head right away. "No, I was awake. I couldn't sleep, and I was going to come upstairs, but then a voice said it was okay and told me to sleep." She set the spatula down carefully and turned to face me fully. "A voice?" she asked. "Was it a man's voice or a woman's?" "A man's," I said, reaching for the syrup bottle. "He knew my name. He called me Evan." I will never forget the look on her face in that moment. It was like watching something crack beneath the surface. Her warm expression tightened, not quite fear, but something close to recognition. Her smile stiffened, and she turned back toward the stove a little too quickly, her shoulders tense. "Well," she said, her voice slightly higher than normal. "You were probably dreaming and just don't remember falling asleep. Dreams can feel very real sometimes." Before I could argue, before I could insist again that I had been fully awake, she changed the subject, asking if I wanted chocolate chips in my pancakes. And just like that, it was over. My sister came running down the stairs moments later, loudly complaining that the birds had woken her up too early. The rest of the morning went on like nothing unusual had happened. My mom picked us up around noon, and I never mentioned the voice to her. That's how kids are. Strange things happen, and we don't always question them. We just accept them and move on. It wasn't until years later, when I was about 14, that the memory resurfaced. I was at a sleepover with friends, and we were telling ghost stories late into the night. When it was my turn, I told them about the voice at Mrs. Keller's house. Halfway through the story, I realized how disturbing it actually was, how terrifying it should have been. My friend stared at me wide-eyed and said, "That's messed up. Are you sure that house wasn't haunted?" The next day, I casually brought it up to my mom while she was folding laundry. "Hey, Mom," I said, trying to sound relaxed. "Do you remember Mrs. Keller, the woman who used to watch us sometimes?" She nodded. "Yeah, why?" I shrugged. "I just remembered something weird that happened there once. I heard a man's voice in the downstairs bedroom. It knew my name." She stopped folding. The towel hung motionless in her hands.
When it started getting late, somewhere between 9 and 10, Mrs. Keller clapped her hands softly and said it was time for bed. My younger sister immediately protested. She hated sleeping alone and would throw a full meltdown if anyone tried to make her. Mrs. Keller didn't argue. She smiled and told her she could sleep upstairs in her room. I was sent to the spare bedroom downstairs, like always. I never really minded. That room had glow-in-the-dark star stickers stuck to the ceiling, and I liked watching them fade as I drifted off. Mrs. Keller followed her usual routine with me. She tucked the blanket up to my chin, kissed my forehead, then crouched down to check under the bed and inside the closet just in case. She left the door cracked open so a thin strip of hallway light spilled across the floor, then took my sister upstairs. I lay there on my back, staring up at the stars as they slowly lost their glow. The house made the same noises it always did, the refrigerator humming, wood popping softly as it cooled, the steady ticking of the grandfather clock in the living room. Normally those sounds faded into the background. That night they didn't. Every noise felt sharper, like it was meant to be heard. I couldn't get comfortable. I kept shifting, rolling from side to side, trying to settle down. A tight, uneasy feeling kept growing in my chest. I'd never been an anxious kid, but that night I felt an intense sense of dread for no clear reason. Nothing had happened. No storm, no scary stories, no bad dreams, just that heavy feeling that something wasn't right. I checked the digital alarm clock beside the bed. 11:32 p.m. The red numbers burned into my eyes. I debated getting up and going upstairs, but I didn't want to look childish. I was supposed to be the older one. I had almost made up my mind when a voice spoke. It was low, calm, and unmistakably male. "Evan, it's all right. Just go to sleep." It sounded close, too close, like someone was sitting right beside me on the bed. I jolted upright and looked around. The room was empty. The doorway was still cracked open. The hallway was silent. Here's the strange part. I wasn't scared, not at first. Looking back now, I know I should have been terrified. A strange man's voice in a dark room when I was alone should have sent me screaming upstairs. But at 7 years old, I didn't think that way. My first thought was that someone was trying to help me. The voice hadn't sounded threatening. There was no anger in it, no warning. It was gentle, reassuring, the way you imagine a protective older relative might sound. And somehow it worked. The tightness in my chest loosened, my breathing slowed, my eyelids felt heavy. I lay back down.
Within moments, I slipped into a deep, dreamless sleep.